is Jack Harris.
My name is Ellie Bryan.
And my name is Dylan Marshall, and this is our presentation about forklifts.
I'll be starting our presentation talking about the purpose and history of forklifts specifically. So what's interesting about forklifts is that they're conceived in the late 1880s, tied to the industrialization of the United States. This was mostly because of the World War I era, leading to the necessity for more efficient labor coming from less people being able to provide labor services. The perpetual decrease in labor ended up bringing forklifts to the top of construction equipment at the time. Now they're commonly found in warehouses all over. They also play a crucial part in construction infrastructure. Although they may not be seen on construction sites, they are fueling the industry with goods and materials. I'll now be explaining the different parts of the forklift. So to mainly break it into three different parts, we have the carrying section of the forklift, the body, and the motor. Starting with the carrying area, we have the forks themselves, being that forklifts were originally designed to lift pallets in the air and stack them, and the backrest to hold the pallet once it's in the air, slightly at an angle. You have the mast here, which will support most all of the weight of the given load. And we'll move on to the body of the forklift. This will most often change in different types of forklifts, larger or smaller bodies, depending on the use or type of forklift is being used. And then we have the motor and the counterweight. So the motor nowadays could be diesel or electric even, but primarily would run on gasoline in the early versions. And the counterweight is used to balance out the weight of the load on top. So rear biased weight will make sure that the forklift itself won't tip over once the load is secured. Lastly, I'll talk about a few of the different types of forklifts. So to start off, we'll have the warehouse forklift. This is most common. You'll see it in your Walmarts, your Menards, etc. These are run on hydraulics, fairly simple, regular size loads, nothing too crazy. Next we have counterbalance forklifts, which act a little bit more like a crane style. The counterbalance is what lifts the load up in the air instead of a hydraulic force in this case. A little bit different style forklift is the side loader. In this case, the forks are on the side of the forklift, aptly named, and these are used in space-confined areas, or if you need to move a lengthy object such as lumber or steel, something similar. And then lastly, we have our rough terrain forklifts. These will often have pneumatic tires instead of cushion tires, providing a little bit more traction in rough terrain, as well as a larger body, providing more stability, and finally lifting the most out of all forklifts. I'll now pass it off to Ellie.
Thanks, Jack. To ensure that you pick the right forklift for your job, the size and capacity play a very big role. First of all, the size of the load and the placement it is on the forklift is very important. As you can see in this figure, there's a larger load of 4,000 pounds, but it's a lot closer to the forklift, so it can still lift it. Whereas the further it gets away from the forklift center of gravity, the loads have to be much smaller in order to allow the forklift to actually lift it without tipping over. So in that figure there, when it's further away, it can only lift 2,600 pounds or so. So the capacity is almost cut in half. And other things to keep in mind when looking at your forklift choice is the aisle width that has to maneuver in, because some forklifts are much wider than others, so maneuverability is a big piece of that. The hours of usage per day or per week is also very important, as some forklifts can have a shorter lifespan than others. You also should look at if you're planning to use it indoors or outdoors, as some forklifts are made for the rougher terrain and weather complications that occur outside. So the other thing you need to keep in mind is if you plan to put an attachment on your forklift. So it's always a good idea to get a forklift that has a larger capacity than you actually need on your job site in order to have that extra capacity in case you put an attachment on so that it can still lift the maximum loads it needs to on your project, even with that reduction from the attachment. It also allows it to have a much longer lifespan because it is not running at its full output all the time. So choosing the number of forklifts is also a very critical part, because if you have too many, you're going to have a lot of wasted time and inefficiencies. But if you don't have enough, you still have a lot of wasted time because all your other machines and trucks are waiting on your forklifts to get there. So you can use that top right equation there to calculate the number of forklifts you need. You will essentially take the number of products that need to be moved and add that to your total storage cycle time divided by 60, and then add 1 to that to get the number of forklifts. To calculate your total storage cycle time, you need to take the travel distance you expect the forklift to go during that storage cycle time and divide it by the forklift's velocity, and then add that to your load and unload times. And then to calculate your velocity, it's actually based on your stopping distance instead of most machines. It's based on the load or the capacity, but forklifts, it really depends on your stopping distance. So you take that constant of 0.394 squared, and then you divide that by your percentage of drawbar drag minus your percent grade in order to get your stopping distance, and then you plug that distance into this table, and it'll tell you your max speed in that top row. And then you can use that to calculate the number of forklifts that you need. Finally, we're looking at efficiency and productivity. So efficiency is your ratio of productive to unproductive time. So you really want to maximize how productive your forklifts are. So for forklifts, your productive time is time spent actually moving materials. And telematics can be used to measure that. It can tell you where your forklifts are on site if it's used with GPS. It can also tell you how long it's spent there and things like that, so that you can use that to determine where you have inefficiencies and how to correct those. It can also be used to shut down your forklifts if they've been undergoing a period of inactivity, so that you reduce fuel costs. Finally, if you pick a better machine or better parts, you will have better productivity and efficiencies because you have less breakdowns, less repairs. So as Jack was saying about the cushion tires and pneumatic tires in the previous slides, for example, cushion tires, you don't have to repair any flats, so they don't get flat. So they're much better for indoor use, they're cheaper, but they don't have as much traction. So if you have an outdoor use, it is probably better to go with pneumatic tires in order to have that traction for that additional cost, because it will make you more productive. And then I will pass it off to Dylan.
Thanks, Ellie. So now I'm talking about the most diverse part about a forklift in the attachments. Now this is what makes forklifts so great, is the fact that you can basically put anything on them to make it work. So some of the most popular attachments are side shifters, which allow you to shift the forks from left to right, so you're able to adjust where the forks are without needing to leave your seat. Another one is fork positioners, which allows you to affect the width of your forks and that from your seat, which allows you to pick up different size pallets and objects. And when you're not lifting pallets, the most popular addition is clamps, which those are often used for paper rolls, for carpet, and other things that aren't used with pallets. The attachments can drastically affect your productivity, but they also affect your loading capacity. They increase your productivity by saving you time from needing to get out of your seat constantly to make little changes, but they also have heavier weights than normal forks, which limits your capacity that you can lift. Now, the data plate is one of the most important pieces of information you get whenever you rent a forklift. This gives you all of the necessary information required for the forklift. It gives you your model and serial number, so you know the forklift you're using. It gives you how far back you can tilt the forklift so you don't overextend it. It gives you any attachments it has, the type, that is your fuel type. So that type is gas and liquid propane. It gives you the width of your forklift, so you know where you can drive it. Gives you your tire size and typing. Gives you the weight of your forklift. And this diagram here at the bottom gives you the information regarding the center point of your load that you're trying to lift. And it gives you recommendations on what size of forks you should use depending on the center point of your forks or of your load. Now, some of the safety tips. OSHA requires that you only operate loads that are within your forklift's rated capacity, which seems pretty self-explanatory, but a lot of people try to skirt around that rule. Knowing the load capacity of your forklift is very important, and knowing how your attachments and the distribution of your weight affects your capacity, as you can see in that diagram, and as I talked about earlier, where your weight is in the forklift can change the amount it's able to lift. Another big piece is making sure your data plate is eligible and correct, because that is what the renter is going to use for your forklift. And if you don't want it broken, it's on you to make sure all that information is correct. So thanks for listening to our presentation about forklifts.